That evening, the grand ballroom buzzed with the energy of a high-profile social gathering. It wasn't just the ornate chandeliers or the dazzling dresses that captured attention, it was the promise of who might walk through the doors. Conversations hummed, laughter echoed, and anticipation hung in the air. Everyone knew that tonight's event wasn't just another meet and greet. People whispered, stealing glances toward the entrance. The guest list boasted an impressive lineup of influential figures, but one name stood out above the rest: Donald Trump. Love him or hate him, his presence always commanded attention, and tonight was no exception. As the evening progressed, Trump made his entrance, accompanied by his signature aura of confidence. The room seemed to shift, the air thickening with curiosity and intrigue. He worked the room like a seasoned pro, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and flashing that unmistakable grin. Whether you were a supporter or a skeptic, you couldn't help but watch. But amidst the sea of admirers and skeptics, someone unexpected caught his eye. In the far corner of the room sat a man whose energy felt impossible to ignore. He wasn't standing like the others. He was seated in a sleek, modern wheelchair that seemed to reflect his personality, sharp, bold, and determined. His posture exuded confidence, and his presence carried a quiet yet powerful magnetism. This wasn't someone who blended into the background. This was someone who had a story. The man, Dr. Ethan Reeves, was no ordinary guest. A highly accomplished medical doctor, Ethan was renowned for his groundbreaking research in regenerative medicine, a field that promised to change lives. Despite the wheelchair, a result of a car accident years earlier, he had built a career that inspired countless others. But tonight, he wasn't here to talk about medicine. He was here as himself, a man who had triumphed over adversity and continued to strive for greatness. As Trump made his way across the room, he noticed Ethan. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of curiosity from one and a knowing confidence from the other. What was it about Ethan that made Trump pause? Was it his commanding presence, his reputation, or simply the intrigue of someone who seemed so different from everyone else in the room? Whatever it was, Trump changed course, heading straight for him. The crowd parted like waves, eyes following Trump's every move. Conversations hushed as whispers filled the void. Ethan, unfazed, offered a calm smile as Trump approached. For a moment, the room felt suspended in time, as if everyone held their breath to see what would happen next. When Trump finally reached Ethan, he extended his hand, breaking the silence. "You must be Dr. Reeves," Trump said, his voice carrying the weight of both curiosity and respect. "I've heard a lot about you." Ethan shook his hand firmly, meeting Trump's gaze without hesitation. "And I've heard quite a bit about you too," he replied, his tone light yet confident. What followed was a conversation that no one in the room could have anticipated. It wasn't just the meeting of two influential figures, it was the collision of two vastly different worlds. Trump's larger-than-life personality met Ethan's quiet strength, and the exchange quickly became the focal point of the evening. But just as their interaction seemed to take an unexpected turn, something happened, a moment so unexpected, so unplanned, that it left the entire room in stunned silence. What could it have been? And how would this meeting between two extraordinary individuals unfold? Stay tuned as the story takes a twist no one saw coming. The room, once alive with chatter, was now eerily silent. All eyes remained fixed on the pair, Donald Trump, a man known for his commanding presence, and Dr. Ethan Reeves, whose quiet resilience seemed to hold its own kind of power. The conversation was too far away for anyone to hear clearly, but the intensity in their body language told its own story. People leaned in closer, straining to catch snippets, but the low hum of their voices remained a mystery to everyone but them. Trump's expression shifted subtly, a rare mix of curiosity and surprise. It wasn't often that someone left him searching for the next word, but Ethan wasn't just another hand to shake or a face to recognize. There was a depth to the man that drew Trump in, even if he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Perhaps it was the calm confidence with which Ethan carried himself, or the stories Trump had heard about the doctor's remarkable journey. Whatever it was, the conversation deepened. "You faced your share of challenges," Trump said, his tone measured. "But you didn't just stop there. You kept going. That's something I respect." Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile, his gaze steady. "Life don't always give you a choice," he replied. "But when it does, you take it. You keep moving, no matter what's in your way." Trump nodded, visibly intrigued. It was clear he wasn't used to hearing such grounded responses. Ethan wasn't trying to impress him or win him over. He was simply speaking his truth, and in that honesty, there was a strength that resonated. Around them, the crowd grew restless. Whispers filled the air as speculation ran wild. Who was this man who had so effortlessly captured Trump's attention? Some recognized Ethan immediately, recalling headlines about his groundbreaking work in medical research. Others exchanged puzzled looks, wondering how someone so understated had managed to stand out in a room full of high-profile figures. A woman nearby leaned toward her companion, her voice low but urgent. That stopped at Ethan Reeves. "He's the one who's been working on that revolutionary treatment, something about regenerating damaged cells. I read about him last year." "Wait," the man beside her whispered back. "Isn't he the one who got into that terrible accident? The one that put him in the wheelchair?" "That's him," she confirmed. "And from what I've heard, he's done more sitting down than most people ever do standing up." The murmurs grew louder, fueled by fragments of recognition and curiosity. But Ethan remained oblivious, or perhaps he simply chose to ignore the attention. His focus was entirely on the conversation unfolding in front of him. Trump tilted his head, studying Ethan closely. "You're not just a doctor," he said, almost as if thinking out loud. "You're a problem solver, a doer." Ethan chuckled softly. "I like to think of myself as someone who doesn't give up," he said. "The way I see it, every obstacle is just another chance to find a solution." Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, a spark of recognition flashing across his face. "That's the mindset that changes the world," he said, his voice firm. "Not just talking, but doing. And you've done a lot." The two men shared a moment of unspoken understanding. It was a rare connection, one that seemed to transcend the usual surface-level interactions of such events. But just as the conversation seemed to reach a deeper level, something shifted. A sharp, unexpected noise cut through the air, a glass shattering against the floor. Heads turned abruptly, the sudden sound jolting the room back into motion. A waiter, flustered and red-faced, hurried to clean up the mess, muttering apologies. The momentary distraction broke the spell, and the crowd began to stir once more. But the intrigue surrounding Ethan and Trump didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. As the evening wore on, the two men continued to talk, their conversation drawing curious glances from all corners of the room. Ethan spoke about his work, explaining his research in terms that even a layperson could understand. He talked about the lives his team hoped to change, the barriers they were breaking in the medical field, and the personal journey that had shaped his approach to both science and life. Trump listened intently, asking questions that revealed a genuine interest. It was a side of him that few in the room had seen before, a moment of reflection and engagement that felt almost out of character. But Ethan had a way of drawing people in, of making them see beyond the surface. And for Trump, it was no different. "I've met a lot of people," Trump said at one point, his voice low enough that only Ethan could hear. "Big names, big achievements, but there's something about you, something different." Ethan didn't respond right away. He simply held Trump's gaze, his expression calm but unreadable. "I don't know about that," he said finally. "But I do believe in what I'm doing, and I believe in the people it's going to help." Trump nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's what matters," he said. "Belief, vision. Without that, none of the rest means anything." The weight of the words hung between them, a rare moment of vulnerability in a setting that usually thrived on appearances and pretense. But before the conversation could go any deeper, they were interrupted. A woman approached, her smile polished but her eyes sharp. "Mr. Trump," she said, her tone smooth but insistent. "Excuse me, but the press is asking for a moment with you." Trump glanced at her, then back at Ethan. For a brief moment, he seemed reluctant to step away. But he nodded, his expression returning to its usual composure. "Of course," he said, his voice carrying the authority everyone expected. The words sounded genuine, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play. He glanced at his hands, the faint scars on his knuckles a reminder of the car accident that had changed his life forever. That moment, that split second, had taught him that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed, and this was no different. Before he could respond, the door opened, and one of Trump's aides stepped in. "Excuse me, Mr. Trump," the aide said, his voice hushed but urgent. "There's a situation that requires your attention." Trump frowned, his expression tightening. He glanced at Ethan, then back at the aide. "Give me a moment," he said, his tone curt but controlled. The aide nodded and stepped out, closing the door softly behind him. Trump turned back to Ethan, his demeanor shifting slightly. "Looks like we'll have to pick this up later," he said, standing and extending his hand. Ethan shook it, his grip firm but cautious. "I'll think about what you said," he replied, "but I need to be sure this is the right move. For the work, for the people it's meant to help." Trump nodded, his expression unreadable. "Take your time," he said, "but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever." As Ethan left the room, his thoughts swirled. The idea of working with Trump was both exhilarating and unsettling. He couldn't deny the potential benefits, but the risks felt just as real. The questions lingered in his mind as he navigated the now empty ballroom, the echoes of the night still fresh. Outside, the crisp night air was a welcome relief. Ethan paused on the steps, staring out at the city lights. The world felt both vast and small in that moment, the possibilities stretching out before him like an uncharted map. But beneath the surface, a nagging sense of unease remained. As he rolled down the ramp toward his waiting car, a voice called out from the shadows, "Dr. Reeves." Ethan turned, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make out the figure approaching. It was the reporter from earlier, her notebook still clutched tightly in her hand. Her face was flushed, and her expression was a mix of excitement and urgency. "I'm sorry to bother you again," she said, slightly out of breath, "but there's something you need to know." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" he asked. The reporter glanced around nervously, as if making sure no one else was listening. "I've been digging into some of the projects Trump's been involved in," she said, her voice low. "And there are things that don't add up. Partnerships that started strong but ended badly." Ethan's jaw tightened, his pulse quickening. "What are you saying?" he asked, his tone sharp. "I'm saying you need to be careful," she replied. "I know his offer sounds incredible, but there's a pattern here. People who've worked with him, some of them regret it. Big promises, big risks, and sometimes the costs are higher than anyone expects." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. The reporter's words echoed the doubts that had been nagging at him all night. Could he trust Trump? Was this opportunity as straightforward as it seemed, or was there something more sinister beneath the surface? Before he could respond, the reporter glanced over her shoulder, her nervous energy increasing. "I shouldn't even be telling you this," she said, "but I felt like you needed to know. You're doing something important, and I'd hate to see it derailed." Ethan nodded slowly, his thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. "Thank you," he said finally. "I appreciate the warning." The reporter hesitated, then gave him a small, almost apologetic smile. "Good luck, Dr. Reeves," she said. "I hope you make the right choice." With that, she disappeared into the night, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The tension inside him had reached a breaking point, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like never before. As his driver opened the car door, Ethan hesitated, staring out at the city once more. The stakes had never felt higher, and as the car pulled away, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the biggest challenge was yet to come. As Ethan sat in the back seat of the car, the city lights blurring past the window, he tried to quiet his racing mind. The reporter's warning had hit him like a freight train, forcing him to confront the very doubts he'd been trying to suppress. Trump's offer had seemed almost too good to be true, and now the shadows around it felt darker, more menacing. Yet, despite his unease, there was no denying the lure of what Trump could provide, a chance to take his research to heights he'd never imagined. The stakes were climbing, and Ethan knew that whatever decision he made would change the course of his life. This wasn't just about him. It was about the people who depended on his work, the lives his research could change. But it was also about his integrity, his values, and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. As the car stopped at a red light, Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled it out to see an unknown number flashing on the screen. His instinct told him to let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. Dr. Rees, a voice on the other end said, calm but with a hint of urgency. This is Samantha Hayes. I work with the Global Ethics Foundation. Ethan frowned, unfamiliar with the name. I'm sorry, who did you say you were? He asked, his tone cautious. Samantha's voice remained steady. I know this is unexpected, but I've been following your work for years. You've made waves in the medical community, and not just for your breakthroughs. Your principles, your refusal to cut corners, they've earned you respect. That's why I'm reaching out. Ethan leaned back in his seat, curiosity mingling with suspicion. What does this have to do with me? He asked. Samantha hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. I heard about your meeting with Trump tonight, she said finally, and I felt compelled to warn you. His involvement in ventures like yours often comes with strings attached, strings that can strangle even the best intentions. Ethan's pulse quickened. First the reporter, and now this. It was as if the universe was conspiring to shake him out of his optimism. What kind of strings are we talking about? He asked, his voice low. Financial control, intellectual property disputes, misaligned goals, Samantha said, her tone serious. I've seen it happen before. Talented individuals with groundbreaking ideas brought into the fold, only to lose everything when their visions no longer aligned with his. You've worked too hard to let that happen. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. He didn't know this woman, and yet her words carried a weight that was hard to ignore. Why are you telling me this? He asked. What do you have to gain? Samantha let out a soft sigh. Nothing, she said. I have no agenda here, Dr. Rees. I'm simply offering you perspective. What you do with it is up to you. Before Ethan could respond, the call abruptly ended. He stared at the screen, the line now dead, and a chill ran down his spine. Who was Samantha Hayes, and why had she reached out now? Her warning echoed the reporter's, amplifying the sense that he was stepping into a minefield. As the car pulled into the driveway of his modest home, Ethan felt a heaviness settle over him. The idea of walking away from Trump's offer seemed almost unthinkable. How could he justify turning down such a massive opportunity? But the mounting warnings were impossible to ignore. If he moved forward, it would be like walking a tightrope over a canyon, one misstep away from disaster. The night was quiet as he made his way inside, the faint hum of the city fading into the background. Ethan set his keys on the counter, then rolled to his desk, where stacks of research papers and medical journals awaited him. Normally, the sight of his work brought him comfort, a reminder of why he pushed himself so hard. But tonight, it felt like a puzzle he couldn't solve. He was about to shut off his laptop when an email notification popped up. The sender was listed as anonymous, and the subject line read, *URGNT, READBEFL you decide *. His stomach tightened as he opened the email, its contents short but chilling. Dr. Rees, you don't know me, but I know what's at stake for you. If you value your work and your reputation, think twice before accepting any deals with Trump. His team isn't just interested in helping you, they're interested in owning you. Look into the Horizon Biotech case if you want proof. Time is running out. Be careful. A friend *. Ethan's heart pounded as he read the message. The name Horizon Biotech stood out like a warning sign, its implications unclear but ominous. He immediately began typing a search into his browser, the name bringing up a flood of results. Articles, court documents, and blog posts painted a picture of a once promising biotech startup that had partnered with Trump's organization years ago. The partnership had started with bold promises and high hopes, much like the one being offered to Ethan now. But within 2 years, the company had collapsed, its assets seized, and its founders embroiled in legal battles. The details were murky, but the pattern was undeniable. Trump's involvement had come with conditions that ultimately left the company vulnerable. Ethan's chest tightened as he realized how easily he could find himself in the same position. As the night stretched on, Ethan found himself trapped in a maze of conflicting information, his mind battling between hope and caution. On one side was the promise of progress, the chance to make a difference on a scale he'd only dreamed of. On the other was the growing sense that this opportunity could be a trap, a gilded cage designed to strip him of control. By the time dawn began to break, Ethan was no closer to an answer. The stakes had never been higher, and the lines between right and wrong had never been more blurred. What he did next would define not just his career, but the very essence of who he was. And as the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something far bigger than himself. Ethan sat in his study, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. The Horizon Biotech case had been a rabbit hole he hadn't expected to fall into, and now, hours later, he was overwhelmed with both dread and determination. The evidence was compelling. Trump's organization had a history of suffocating its partners under layers of contracts and fine print, draining their resources until nothing remained. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to walk away, but the opportunity still called to him like a siren's song. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He reached for his phone and dialed the number Trump had given him earlier. His fingers hesitated over the call button, but he pressed it anyway, the ringing in his ear adding to the tension. Trump answered almost immediately, his voice sharp and alert despite the early hour. "Dr. Reeves," Trump said, sounding unsurprised. "I had a feeling I'd be hearing from you." Ethan didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I need clarity," he said firmly. "About the terms of this partnership, about Horizon Biotech, about everything." Trump was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his tone was measured but firm. "Horizon Biotech was a mistake," he admitted. "I won't deny that. They overpromised and underdelivered. But you're not them, Ethan. You're different. Your work speaks for itself." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. "You say that," he replied, "but the evidence suggests otherwise. If I move forward, I need guarantees, ironclad assurances that my work will remain mine, that my integrity won't be compromised." Trump chuckled softly, the sound both reassuring and unnerving. "You're a smart man, Ethan. I wouldn't expect anything less. Let's meet again, face to face. I'll lay everything out, no strings attached." Ethan hesitated but finally agreed, setting a time for later that day. He hung up, his chest tight with anticipation. He didn't trust Trump, not entirely, but he also couldn't ignore the chance to protect his work while still seizing the opportunity. It felt like walking a tightrope without a safety net. The meeting took place in a sleek conference room high above the city, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view. Trump greeted Ethan warmly, his demeanor calm but commanding. Spread across the table were contracts, detailed financial breakdowns, and projections that made Ethan's head spin. Trump's legal team hovered in the background, their presence adding an edge to the already tense atmosphere. "I want you to succeed," Trump said, gesturing to the documents. "And this partnership is how we make that happen. You'll have full control over your research. My role is to provide the resources and connections you need to scale it." Ethan studied the contracts carefully, his lawyer by his side. To his surprise, the terms were straightforward, with none of the traps or loopholes he'd feared. But just as he began to feel a glimmer of hope, the unexpected twist arrived. A second set of documents was brought in, these marked confidential. Trump's expression shifted, his usual confidence tinged with something darker. "There's one more thing," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "This is an optional proposal, a chance to expand your work into areas you haven't considered." Ethan opened the file, his eyes scanning the contents. What he saw made his stomach churn. The proposal detailed the use of his medical advancements for purposes that went far beyond healthcare, military applications, surveillance technologies, and other areas that felt deeply unethical. "This isn't what I signed up for," Ethan said, his voice steady but edged with anger. Trump held up a hand, his tone soothing. "It's just a proposal, Ethan. Nothing is set in stone, but imagine the possibilities. Your work could save lives in ways you've never imagined." Ethan closed the file and pushed it away. "I don't want to imagine it," he said firmly. "My work is about healing, not harm. If this is part of the deal, then I'm out." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Trump studied Ethan for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough," he said. "I respect your principles. The first set of terms still stands. The choice is yours." Ethan's lawyer leaned in, whispering something about how rare it was for someone to walk away from such an offer unscathed. But Ethan already knew his decision. He signed the original contract, ensuring full control of his research while rejecting the additional proposal. As he left the building, the weight on his shoulders began to lift. He had taken the risk, navigated the minefield, and emerged with his integrity intact. But just as he reached the street, his phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, "You made DA right CHOYC*." Ethan opened it, his breath catching as he read the brief message inside. It was from Samantha Hayes, the woman who had warned him before. Attached was a document detailing yet another failed partnership involving Trump, one that mirrored Horizon Biotech in almost every way. Had he signed the second set of terms, he would have been walking straight into the same trap. As he stared at the screen, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and unease. He had made it through the storm, but the experience left him changed. The world he operated in was more dangerous than he'd ever realized, and trust was a currency more valuable than gold. Ethan rolled toward his waiting car, the city bustling around him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on solid ground. The choices he'd made had been hard, but they were his, and that made all the difference. Yet, as he drove away, a small part of him couldn't help but wonder, had he truly seen the last of the shadows, or were they still waiting just out of sight? As the car moved through the bustling streets, Ethan leaned back in his seat, gazing out at the city's skyline. The tension that had clung to him over the past few days began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had faced the kind of decision that could define a lifetime, and though it hadn't been easy, he'd stayed true to himself and his principles. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of peace. Back at his lab, Ethan returned to his work with renewed focus. The deal he had signed with Trump's organization brought in the resources he desperately needed to push his research forward, and with complete control over his project, he could continue his work on his own terms. He hired a small but dedicated team, carefully selecting people who shared his vision and values. Together, they began to tackle challenges that had once seemed insurmountable, inching closer to breakthroughs that could change lives. Despite his cautious optimism, Ethan remained vigilant. He kept a close eye on the partnership, reviewing every detail and ensuring that no one overstepped the boundaries he had set. His experience had taught him that trust was earned, not given, and he wasn't about to let his guard down. It was exhausting at times, but it also gave him a sense of control he hadn't realized he needed. In the months that followed, his research began to attract widespread attention. Medical journals praised his innovative approaches, and patients whose lives were improved by his advancements became vocal advocates. The public recognition was gratifying, but it was the stories of the people he was helping that truly fueled his drive. Each success reinforced his belief that he had made the right choices, even when the path had been fraught with uncertainty. Meanwhile, the mystery of Samantha Hayes lingered in the back of his mind. Her warning had been instrumental in shaping his decision, and the email she'd sent after the deal had confirmed what he'd already suspected, that he had narrowly avoided a disaster. But who was she really? And why had she taken such an interest in his work? Ethan had tried to track her down, reaching out to the Global Ethics Foundation, but no one there seemed to know her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. One day, as Ethan was leaving the lab late in the evening, he found a small envelope tucked under the windshield wiper of his car. His name was written on it in neat handwriting, and when he opened it, he found a single sheet of paper with a short message. Asterisk, keep going. The world needs people like you. Asterisk, there was no signature, but he knew it had to be from Samantha. He smiled, tucking the note into his pocket. Whoever she was, she had been right about so much. He would honor her belief in him by staying the course. As Ethan's work progressed, he began to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. The experience had been a crash course in navigating the complexities of ambition, ethics, and power. He'd learned that success wasn't just about achieving goals. It was about doing so in a way that aligned with his values. It was a lesson he hoped to pass on to his team, who looked to him not just as a leader, but as an example. The partnership with Trump's organization turned out to be surprisingly smooth. Perhaps it was because Ethan had been so firm in setting boundaries from the start, or maybe it was because he had proven himself to be a force to be reckoned with. Either way, the resources continued to flow, and the organization kept its promises. Ethan couldn't deny that the collaboration had its benefits, but he also knew it wouldn't last forever. He was already making plans to ensure that when the time came to part ways, his work would remain independent and secure. Years later, Ethan stood on a stage at an international medical conference, addressing a packed audience. His team's work had not only advanced the field, but had also saved countless lives. As he spoke about the journey that had brought him here, he couldn't help but think of the pivotal moments that had shaped his path, the doubts, the warnings, the decisions that had seemed impossible at the time. He shared the lessons he had learned, emphasizing the importance of staying true to one's principles, even in the face of immense pressure. The audience erupted into applause as Ethan finished his speech, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the people who had played a role in his journey, his team, his patients, even Trump, and of course Samantha Hayes. He had never found out who she really was, but he no longer felt the need to. Her influence had been profound, and he would carry her words with him always. After the conference, Ethan returned to his lab, where his team was hard at work on their latest project. He moved through the space, checking in with each member and offering words of encouragement. The atmosphere was one of collaboration and shared purpose, a reflection of the values Ethan had worked so hard to instill. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey he had taken, the lessons he had learned, and the people who had believed in him along the way. As he sat at his desk, reviewing data from their latest experiments, Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment that was hard to put into words. The road had been anything but easy, but it had led him to a place where he could make a real difference. And in the end, that was all he had ever wanted. The sun set outside the lab, casting a warm glow over the city. Ethan looked out the window, a quiet smile on his face. The journey wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, new questions to answer, and new lives to touch. But for now, he was content, knowing that he had stayed true to himself and his mission. And as the night settled in, he felt ready for whatever came next.